We have somewhat run out of time, but not completely. And I remember that one of the things that was slightly less than perfect last time in Tallant was that we ran out of time for discussion and questions from the floor. So we have got a little bit of time if we allow ourselves to overrun a little bit. And I thought maybe, rather than convening a panel discussion, we should invite you to make some comments. And actually, you are the panel now. I've asked if the camera can actually be turned on you rather than on me or anything that's going on here. I think this is a moment to try and reflect a little bit on what has been happening for the last, I think it's only 2 days, but God, it feels a lot longer. I also wanted to say to Sally that, 5 months is a long time. I mean, we got this together in 4, so, no problem. It's been an incredibly full couple of days, and I think it was. And I think that really what we're asking people to do is to come up with some thoughts about what you have managed to extract from where we've got to now. And that process of extraction, I think, will continue not just tomorrow, but next week, and I hope for many months afterwards. Because the next step from extraction, as Robin Shale and his colleagues have made very clear, is production. And it's what we do with the ores that we grind down and extract from, and what we make with it. So Sally's presentation just now, exemplary in its brevity, was we asked Sally to make this presentation partly because Elisha's not going to be with us tomorrow, so we needed her to speak today, but also it is the kind of literal space between what we've been thinking about earlier today, which was these various physical processes, mostly physical processes of extraction, and then moving into the more metaphorical discussion about how artists use these materials and ideas that are fed to them. One of the things that struck me, especially this afternoon, was to try and think about what the other of a kind of extractive industry model would be. And I guess it's the pastoral. And so instead of these incredibly exciting spikes and falls that we've seen represented in various ways, you have something that's rolling and flat. And I would like to know, as many of you are artists, which kind of graph is the one that you aspire to. Maybe there are some comments.
Which is it's kind of a question for Sally. I think it's also a question for all of us, and maybe it's an unwelcome question in a certain sense. It goes back to the beginning of Sally's presentation when she asked the question, how can we make a place vibrant? Now in the context of rethinking a biennial, in the context of a kind of experimental event such as this, don't we ask ourselves, far too seldom we ask ourselves, how on earth did we get to the position where that was a question for artists, when that was a task that artists are supposedly capable of fulfilling? Why are artists asking themselves, how can we make a place vibrant? And in a way it kind of mystifies me that we've reached this position where we think that that's the appropriate question, and that where we think that somehow that art can fill these voids.
I was just going to add that the word
Penelope, can you identify yourself? Sorry, the last comment came from Robin Mackay. I think you'll all know that. This is Penelope. Can you say who you are?
Yes. Well, you've already said it twice. Penelope Curtis. The word that came to my mind a lot yesterday was a word that hasn't come up again today, was separation. And it seems very much that the extraction process wasn't so much either or, and it wasn't two-dimensional. It wasn't about, this is good and that is bad. It's more about separation of many different elements and identifying the mix of different elements. So ultimately it was qualitative rather than simply extractive. And I suppose if I was to try and work out what that might mean for an artist, it would be kind of knowing that there are a number of different avenues and making sure that your pursuit, whichever avenue you choose, is using the right element, the right material. And we were looking at the slices of rocks in the lab, and it wasn't working out that one was the one you wanted and the rest you didn't. In fact, there might be 8 or 9 things that all had different kinds of value, and you had to work out which was the one to extract in that for a particular purpose, and when there was sufficient economic value or other kind of value, really, for that particular element that you were seeking. That's a kind of combination of physical and metaphorical.
I live in Penzance. My name's Jean Southern, and it strikes me that Liverpool has the most fabulous architecture, and so does Penzance. And it would really sort of mind the community if there was some artists never seem to focus on these wonderful buildings, and it seems a terrible pity because they're made out of local stone and local metals and things, and it's a great opportunity missed, I think, especially in Penzance.
Robin, would you like to re-articulate your question?
Do I need to
Yes, okay.
I was actually going to follow what Robin had articulated. I'm Tessa Fitzjohn. I'm a curator, producer, independent. I'd just like to follow on from your comment, Robin. I think it's really, it's increasingly relevant, particularly as funding gets tighter and tighter. What is the role of the artist? Because we expect so much, and we expect them to regenerate our cities, usually for not very much money, and we just increasingly the challenges of being an artist are many, and I suppose what I would like to say is that I think artists bring a unique quality of inquiry to whatever they choose to look at, and it's that inquiry, whether it's geology or our great houses, and that's the quality that I think that we should really value.
Apparently I'm following. Veronica Vickery, an artist based in Cornwall. I don't know if it's relevant or not, but one thing that's been hitting me is we've talked a lot today about labour, things like that, and the problematics of labour on one hand, but also hearing from miners who can't stop mining. We met a whole bunch of miners yesterday that spent all their time under the ground, and everywhere you go in West Cornwall, they just don't want to stop mining. So there's this idea that on one hand it's been, exploited, and on the other hand, it's a very different story going on. And so I think for me, it's very much about complexity. How, as an artist, do we work with complexity? And I don't know if that answers your... And I think for me, I'm not particularly out to change society or anything like that. It's much more about holding up a mirror to something and working, how does my work function in terms of complexity? How can images, how can actions function in terms of complexity? That's, okay.
My name's Sara Boal. I live in Cornwall. I'm an artist and occasionally curate. I'm interested, Sally, in your thoughts about the Liverpool biennial. And if we take the idea that Liverpool as a place is a resource, what's the purpose of extraction in relation to Liverpool? Because that's the locus, and obviously, as a resource, I mean, obviously, it's history, it's sociology, it's economics, all of it is culture, all of those sorts of things. What's the quarry, to quote Robin from earlier? What's the prize, if you like? But also, is there potential that it leaves voids and waste? And what impact does that have on a city once these processes have passed?
Well, that's quite complicated. Where are you? Oh, there. It's stretching the metaphors, so I think to try and answer everyone's questions, I think it's not about artists doing the job of social workers or regeneration or any of those things. Actually, I think it's about trying to think, how do we build a society within which art has a role to play in relation to a number of different kinds of values. So it's not one size fits all, but there are many different places in which I think artists and art operate. It includes the gallery, it includes the museum, but it also includes, asking complex and difficult questions about the urgencies that we face. And so I think the resources of the city, are actually quite hard to identify at the moment. I mean, maybe the resources of the city are the people who are living there. And we have great knowledge production economy. There are 3 really great universities there at the moment. There's a lot of people who need to find a way to think differently about what's possible. And artists, it's not that artists have a duty to play that role, but that is part of what artists do. They ask complex and difficult questions in the world that allow us to think differently about what's possible for a city to rethink itself. And to me there feels an incredible urgency to that. So this isn't about doing a nice art project, an international art project. This is a really urgent project about bringing the very best artists in the world to be part of a conversation in Liverpool about what's necessary and how it's possible for it to become a vibrant cultural place, as it deserves to be and as it will be, as it is, but how it can grow on many different fronts at this moment in Lake Hampton. I could go on, I'm not going to, but I think it's not as simple as identifying places for artists to make work and then doing something that's surface driven. This is really about artists playing a really important role as artists in many different ways. Does that answer? No. So can you go over there and then back to Robin? Nick.
I'm Nick Serota, I work at the Tate, and I wonder, Sally, whether you could try and define for me, because I'm not sure I really understand the meaning that you have in using the word vibrant. It worries me that vibrant suggests to me, if we're not careful, models of economic growth that are probably not available to us any longer. It suggests a degree of optimism, which I think is potentially false. It seems to me that artists aren't necessarily about making places better, but more about helping us to understand what places are. And I worry, I noticed when you were doing your slides, and you were preparing them, you actually added in the word vibrant.
No, I added in the word place.
I did you?
The
Okay.
word city.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
And I just I have real, quite deep concerns about taking on the responsibility for vibrancy, and because it suggests all kinds of things about entertainment and about...
I don't mean it like that.
But anyway, perhaps you can tell us what you do mean by vibrant.
Gosh, I don't mean that. I don't mean tap dancing.
No, I know you don't mean that. But Tom Emerson and I were talking a moment ago about an example he was describing in what was East Germany, on the borders of Poland, where the whole way in which the reduction in the size of the city has been managed has not been about camouflage. It's been about admitting that there is a real change taking place and trying to find an alternative model, rather than assuming that Liverpool can only succeed if it's like Manchester. Or the images you showed, of course, were about Liverpool succeeding if it was like Shanghai. I'm not saying you believe it should be like that, but I just think that we are still searching for a model, and it feels to me that what artists should be doing is helping us identify those models.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly don't mean vibrancy in that way. What I mean is a city that's productive in terms of the way that it's thinking about itself. So I think, I'm not talking about a spectacularizing cultural project that brings a kind of veneer and optimism that's not real to the city. What I mean is that it becomes trying to work towards the place being productive in its own terms and looking at itself and trying to grow things from the city. So vibrant and productive in its own terms. I don't mean vibrant above that. Does that make sense? It's frowning still.
Well,
Can we, I think this, Iain, I'm going to give everybody one. And Stephen's got something to say, I think. Very dangerous in an auction.
Yes, Iain Boal here. Just on vibrant and resource. Vibrant means vibration, and as a cyclist, we really don't like vibration. An Irish vet worked on anti-vibration devices for his clients with the horses in late 19th century roads, and I've been in his archives. His name is John Dunlop. But the invention of the pneumatic sausage that dealt with the problem of vibrancy and the pedal caused an immediate genocide in the Congo. So that's on vibration. Resource, as soon as you say resource, resources discourse implies, by definition, extraction must follow from taking the view of something as a resource. So I think to think hard about even the term resource. It's, of course, it's the capitalist logic to see the world as a potential resource. That's it.
This is just a little addition. Carolyn Black, I'm a freelance arts producer. I worked with acoustic scientists last year while we were talking about vibrate and vibration. And I was very interested in the way they talked about acoustic vibration being exciting something. And I think going back to what Sam was saying, I think exciting people intellectually and by giving them fantastic art, I don't see why that sort of vibrancy is so negative. I think it's a very good thing to do.
I'm not sure that Stephen, I think he didn't want to speak. You were just scratching on his.
I'd just like to add perhaps a bit further precision. Of course, needless to say, I agree that artists challenge us and it can change the way we see the world and so on. And absolutely, I do agree with what Nick was saying, is that their job is not necessarily to fix things, but to expose things in a different way. But specifically, the problem of the biennial in general, and of the type of art which is seems to be demanded by it. And I'm saying in general to take the heat off Sally because it's a bit unfair. But I think that the problem in general is that the artists' practice and increasingly artists' training being circumscribed by this demand that they produce a kind of social glue to seep into the gaps of society. And I think it's a demand which is extremely bad for practice and for the thinking of artists. And if we think back, for a long time, the way in which artists communicated with society is through public sculpture, where in a public sculpture you're representing society to itself in a certain way. And of course there are great examples of that, and there are plenty of appalling examples of them. But in a way that was a far easier job than what we're asking now. And I think it's an impossible job, and it's possibly very bad for maybe for artists' self-esteem to try to aspire to providing this kind of glue to put us back together again. I think there's this kind of cycle where that's the type of art that's being demanded, and therefore that's the type of art that's being produced, and artists are producing with an eye to being able to fit into this agenda. And that agenda is ultimately a capitalist agenda. There's no two ways about it. It's an agenda of producing cultural capital. So I think we need to think very carefully about what's going on there.
By way of a slightly abstract. John Gerard, artist. A riot can be extremely vibrant, as such. And it brings me to think of the elephant in the room, which is China, where there's about 20 riots a day unfolding as we speak, undocumented and unreported upon. And I suppose China is a kind of an elephant in the room in a way, in that it is the extractive monster of the... Monster is the wrong word, I'm sorry, retract that. It's the major extractive entity globally, particularly in Africa. And it is, as such, draining many of the sort of energies that may have animated the Liverpools of this world to that region. And essentially, artists in opposition to rioters are expected to come in and sort of fix the problem. So I just wanted to introduce, really, I suppose, China to this discussion, because it just seemed suddenly very absent, and it seems to be pertinent. That's not too much of a digression.
I'm Martin Clark from Taste and Ives. I'm not going to bring China in, John, sorry, but somebody else might pick that up in a minute. But I wanted to maybe respond to some of the comments that Robin was making as well. And it strikes me, looking at Sally's presentation, and without, again, focusing too much on Sally's presentation, which is very much, as she described, a kind of working thinking process. But I think there's a really important distinction to be made between the structure of a Biennale and then the art that happens within it. And I think what we need to do is produce, if there are going to be these things called Biennales, or if these kinds of programs are going to happen, we need to think about the best possible way that money can be spent and art can be produced within that. So it's about making a distinction between, and I don't want to use the word vibrancy necessarily, but seeing as that's the word that we're all using, what does encourage me is that there is a way to rethink those models and to create the spaces for these conversations to happen. And I think in terms of what Sally's presented, these ideas of these models of both conversation and dispersion and engagement over a 10-year period could produce a platform and a structure in which art that doesn't need to be anything to do with vibrant or doesn't need to be spectacular, and it's nothing to do with the kind of Biennale art that we've all seen, and which I think Robin's referring to, and which I completely agree with. The idea that we're trying to ask artists to solve those problems, to be that social glue, is completely misguided. I completely agree. But I think we can hopefully produce structures where we can then allow artists to make really difficult, really complex, really almost slight gestures, but that really mean something and really engage. And I just think it's important to distinguish those two operations, really.
Stephen.
I'm Stephen Page, an artist,
based in Plymouth soon. Thank you. Leaving Cornwall, so not going too far. I've been thinking, and even though I was scratching my nose, I was still thinking. And it's this notion of delivery and the method of delivery. And there's been a lot of talk in Cornwall about the manifesto and manifesto dialogues, and then the Cornwall programme, and about this kind of ambition to deliver. And I suppose, and knowing Sally recently taking over the Liverpool Biennial and being quite excited about that proposition for this refresh. And actually, Martin, you were touching on it, this kind of, a 10-year programme, what takes place. Is there a new model out there that we're not just fulfilling the notion of a biennial need? And there seems to be, it's an expedient delivery system because it gets put together at a certain period of time. And we know what it's like at certain openings in the festivals and fairs around the world. So, there's an answer here, but and there's discussions in Plymouth at the moment with what's going to be taking place over the next few years. And I'm just trying to think, well, we can't. When are we able to move away from a biennial model in terms of delivery? And again, to answer Robin's, this fulfilling the artists. Following this, and of course, we have a big commission in a very exotic and exciting city. Of course, you jump at the commission. But at the same time, well, then, how does all this change? And what is the model of change? And it seems actually that there is in the Liverpool biennial model that Sally's looking at. This 10-year program suddenly seems to be cracking the biennial egg, and this kind of, he's coming off the wall now. So that actually, rather than think of biennial, I don't know what the 10-year word would be. But there's, in that space, maybe that's the answer. You stop thinking of things because obviously I know there's the funding stream thing, and there's the kind of getting the partners together, the stakeholders, and that energy, but maybe there's, and it's, I suppose, that going back to this kind of, where do artists sit and practitioners, where's the cultural offer in that, and it suddenly becomes much more of a kind of, this is what a municipality delivers, and it's not about 2 years cultural offer, it's much more of a kind of threaded. But this is it's a larger thing we're probably talking about, but yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to, let's say, vehemently challenge Martin's idea that you can somehow, you can make a distinction between the structure and the content. I mean, surely nobody seriously thinks that the explosion of relational aesthetics was just came out of nowhere, completely unrelated to a certain facility it holds for a certain organisational, bureaucratic, and financial structure that work within the art world. And I think that the danger is that exactly what I was trying to say is that the structure ends up driving the content, and that's the real central danger.
Can I just respond to that,
Yeah.
and I promise we won't have a conversation to it. Because I think we should open it out a bit more. I agree with you entirely, and that's what the point I was making was not that the structure doesn't inform the content of the work and the production of the work, but that's exactly why you need to readdress the structure in order to produce a new model where a different kind of art is possible. I completely agree with you. The biennale structure and this idea that you can bring artists into a place for a project that happens every 2 years, it's a different bunch of artists, it produces a very particular kind of work, and there's often as well this kind of rhetoric of kind of social, kind of utopian kind of social value and activism attached to that. And I think I agree entirely with Robin, it's completely wrong. So my point wasn't that you can disassociate them. My point was that you need to address the structure, and maybe it was just that by rethinking those structures, you can have a very, very vibrant, complicated, complex structure that has been set up precisely in order to allow for a kind of work which is the opposite of that, and which doesn't put all of those demands back onto the artists. It's about trying to get that as far away from the artist as possible to allow for really the space for really creative, engaged, and genuinely productive projects to happen.
Yeah,
I mean, all of that's an ambition, but that would be the ambition.
We agree, but I would just say I would question whether that can actually happen within the biennial structure. So that goes back to Stephen's point about creating a completely different kind of structure.
Is there anybody at the back who'd like to say I feel that there might be. No? Nobody's scratching their nose. Everybody's being very careful. Yes.
Can I just make...
Nils. Oh, sorry, Nick. Go on.
I just want to come back on this word vibrant. Because I didn't want to make it sound as though I was being critical of Sally as such. And I think there is a certain paradox, I'm sure, about me from the position I sit in, advancing the question in the way that I am. But because everyone will associate me with ideas about growth and
building stuff.
Sorry?
Building things.
But I suppose what I, in a way, wanted to say was the thing that worried me, disturbed me a little bit about the word you use. If you meant energy, which I suspect you did really mean, that was one thing. But if it's about conforming to people's expectations of what a biennial can produce in terms of a palliative for a declining city, or a biennial producing a certain kind of regeneration in the city, that worried me. I mean, the artist who I think of most in the context of what we've been discussing today, and I'm afraid I wasn't here for a part of the afternoon, is, and the word I think of is entropy and Smithson, as being really highly relevant to what we're all discussing today. And I suppose the reason I'm wanting to advance the discussion in this way is that this is a group of people who, to some extent, understand each other, trust one another. And what worried me about the word vibrant was that it sounded like as though you were talking to your Arts Council paymasters. Because I use those kind of words all the time when I'm talking to ministers and other people. And I suppose in a way what I was hoping was that this discussion, I think you're probably part of it too, needs to be a discussion amongst colleagues and friends who are genuinely trying to find a new way, rather than to conform to something which our paymasters expect.
Shall we take Nils and whilst you shall we take Nils and then you can...
Nils Norman. I just wanted to respond to a few things what Robin was saying. Robin was making these generalizations about kind of a politically active or socially gluing and art practice, which I think is very problematic, because these types of activities are highly site-specific, and they're very different from each other in different ways. And what happens in biennials and in sort of higher curatorial, spectacular events, what's going on underneath the radar is much more interesting and is much more effective in a way, but they're just not sexy, or they just don't fit the kind of language or the parameters that are needed for this kind of vibrancy model. So I just think that there are things going on, and I don't think you can generalize them in a way that Robin did, and I think they're very important.
Shall I say stop? Yeah. Okay. I don't think I'm on. I think someone's cut off my mic. It's like an IQ test. Great. I'm really sorry I used the word vibrancy. That's all I meant to say. He wants me to stand up. I think I now know, because I've seen lots of those drawings and those kind of applications, and I've seen vibrancy used in a particular way, and that's not the way that I was using it. I'm using it in a very different way, but we can replace it with another word. I'm trying to think of what that word would be. But it is, for me, it is about a very serious long-term project that's unfolding in depth and complexity. And by trying to come up with new structures, what I'm trying to do is create a different kind of space, so I can work with artists on projects that are long-term and challenging and complex, and open up the difficulties of making art, not just making art in Liverpool, making art full stop, and do things that couldn't happen anywhere else in the world. And that's kind of what I want to try and create. And by sharing my thinking at such an early stage, it's been great to get such a lot of feedback. Thank you. Because that's the first time I've ever shown my plans to anybody. So I just kind of thought it would be interesting amongst friends, Nick, to say, to see what kind of response I got, and that was great. Very useful and very helpful, because that's not something that's going to be launched until November. And that's not what's launched on Tuesday.
Paul? Can you identify?
Yeah, Paul Chaney. I think the other part of this, which Sally's talking about this longevity, and something is a point that you made, Teresa, when you asked for responses about the idea of a long-term flat approach compared to a more spiky up and down, peaks and trough approach, and Nick was also alluding to that. And what we tried to show in our presentation this morning was the coefficient between consumption and population. I just wonder if this is something that we have to admit, that with a longer-term, flatter approach, there are going to have to be less people involved.
Researcher and curator, independent, or something like that. No, I just wanted to say, maybe in response to Nick, that perhaps the way you address that issue of language, in that sense, I would even think that perhaps Sally's way to present it was, maybe as artists or curators, we should take that language and, in order to deal with the issues that Robin was talking about, that perhaps we shouldn't be friends who use terms with which we are very comfortable, but actually we should take those terms that are problematic in a way that Nick suggested, and actually maybe flip it around or do something with it.
Is that enough for now? I think we've sedimented and kind of churned a little. And tomorrow, the morning session tomorrow is in fact devoted to talking about what artists do. It will start with Andrea Schlicker talking about the Folkestone. She curated 2 Folkestone triennials. And then we have Miroslav Balka, who's going to be talking about his relationship, I think one that has no sense of responsibility to be vibrant, with Botwaj in, I'm sure I said it wrong, yes? In Tallant. And then finally, Nils is going to be talking about some of his projects. And then we have more time for discussion. So thank you all very, very much. And,